starting with, okay, we're going to have a canal of a certain size. Now let's figure out what the impacts are. So it's a different approach that we have been advocating. Delay is not in our interest. Fish are doing badly every day. We're not trying to delay this. We're trying to move ahead and help you get the answers you need to make sound decisions.
I think with that, we're going to move to our last issue, which is Delta Finance. We'll ask Mr. Caves to stay. And
easy one.
Yeah, well, just how you pay for all this stuff. And Jay Hansen from the Building Trades is going to join us. And is Ron Gastelum here? I think we're going to ask Ron Gastelum from the REAL Coalition, from the business community, to come forward as well. So,
Yeah, how do we pay for this?
Mr. Caves, you want to lead off again?
Sure, Mr. Chair, members, Joe Caves on behalf of the Nature Conservancy. I guess the best way to speak to this is sort of first talk about what's in the Smithian bill and then just mention more generally what the kind of broader issue is. There's an attempt in the Smithian bill to provide, as the Delta Vision Task Force recommended, a sort of broad-based fee approach. It breaks down into really two parts, and I would say there's a third sort of related part. The first is really a beneficiary pay fee concept, which is for the agencies that would build the peripheral canal or any alternative conveyance, that there's a requirement that they pay for the conveyance and for mitigation and for operating costs. That's well within what's contemplated within BDCP. There's then a more general fee authority, and it is a general fee authority that essentially says if you have an impact or you have a benefit, that the council can develop a fee for that. There are some limitations in terms of what can be covered in terms of the overall cost and a time frame as to when that would be done. And so they really fall, I think, into two different categories under sort of the legal structure we use to cover fees. One is really a beneficiary fee, a user fee, and the other is a mitigation fee. And I think it's the mitigation fee concept that's really embodied in the second, the broader-based watershed fee. One of the issues that will certainly exist politically with trying to impose a mitigation fee that doesn't have clear limits on it is that everyone will do their worst-case analysis. And you'll probably hear from that in various letters and others from all the agencies that are going to be concerned about what this agency might do and how broad and expansive those fees might be. As you're looking at this, one of the things for you to consider is whether or not you want to put parameters on it, whether you want to define more specifically exactly what's covered in the fee structure. And that kind of brings me to there really are sort of three elements of a public funding strategy for this that you have to think about. One is there's the easy part, which is who's going to pay for any physical infrastructure, for the mitigation, those things. That's pretty well agreed to. BDCP contains those elements. One of the things that's not included in here, but you probably want to include, is some provision to make sure that the BDCP agreement or any related agreement contains a level of funding for direct impact mitigation to the Delta counties, to the development of the Delta Science Program. It's not listed in here, but it is one of the things that's been contemplated under BDCP, not referenced here. And the other is to make sure that there's an appropriate contribution to the administrative costs for the council and for the Conservancy. When you get into the second area, the mitigation fee, as I mentioned, that's the area where you're going to have there will be the biggest political concern, and that's the area I think this legislature really needs to think about how they're going to constrain it. And finally, we have a reference to other public funding, and this is the thing everyone's been struggling with, and the governor issued his letter on saying we need to do a bond, and we need to do a large-scale bond that is comprehensive and covers the entire range of water infrastructure needs. And certainly there are a number of those that have been introduced this year. Given the state's very challenging fiscal circumstances, obviously there's reason to pause and step back and think about, can we do that? Is that a practical alternative in this fiscal reality? I would say, looking at the overall package you have here, there are elements that are not easily paid for with fees, and that there is a good argument to be made for a public component to pay for. We've heard some of them discussed here today. in order to do an NCCP and really fund to a restoration standard, and that restoration, that recovery standard that's required under the NCCP does require a contribution of public dollars. There's a specific requirement in the NCCP Act that says the agencies applying for the permission have to pay for all of their costs to fully mitigate their impacts. But in any system, such as the Delta, you have legacy impacts. You have the impacts from, decades, over a century of development and diversion and activities and drainage and everything else that have to be addressed. And the way in the past we've dealt with that for NCCPs is there's been a public contribution, what is really recognized as a public share. That's traditionally come from bonds. The challenge we have today is, can we afford to do that? The current estimates of what we're looking at probably for the public share on that is probably around $2 billion.
Okay, I think on that note, we'll I'm sure have some questions about that. But why don't we go to Ron Gastelum? Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm here representing the Real Coalition. Last week you heard from Jim Levine. Jim is with the Bay Area Council. I am with the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm their vice chair. And we've been working for over a year to bring business groups from throughout the state together to be able to sit at the table with you as we make some of these important decisions. A bit of history. I'm actually very encouraged with what I'm seeing today. When I was formerly with the Metropolitan Water District, I didn't have the nerve to even say the word peripheral canal or alternative conveyance or whatever you call it. We just did not have an environment where the legislature wanted to talk about it, that any of us wanted to talk about it, and here we are. And we're talking about it in great detail.
Let's not talk about it too specifically, though.
Well, we are talking about it. So however you want to cast it.
May I just say it's not PC, peripheral canal?
Very good. But light years ahead of where we were. The business community that we have brought together has proposed a alternative council, if you will, to be focused primarily on how the money is spent. In the business community, we feel like we have a fair amount of expertise, and we have criteria that we have offered on how that might be done. I would also suggest to you that our view is governance is occurring at various levels. So it is not, in our view, accurate to think about one governance all being council, that there are many people that are going to be involved and that the challenge is to get it right. Our proposal is to offer up a council that would do a piece, and that is to manage that investment decision as best we can. Going back to our view on what is the right structure here, is it fee, is it bond? Our view is that you cannot do a governance without a financial plan, that it really simply will not work for us to go into a decision-making mode without knowing how much money we have. So in effect, if we can figure out how much money we need, perhaps going back to some of the earlier comments, we're prepared to come to the table and fully engage in how that might be paid for. I think our preference is broader-based fees, obviously a comprehensive solution that would include all the elements we've talked about, perhaps fees that we've never heard about before. So we're very open on that, and I would close by saying that a fee could in fact be the equivalent of a general bond in many ways and cheaper. And it could be dedicated to restoration, that big component, that unknown. But we need to define those amounts, and we need to be able to sell the public and the business community that we're actually going to get benefits beyond the restoration. We're going to need to link it to the water supply. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jay Hansen.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. and Madam Chair. Jay Hansen with the State Building Construction Trades Council. I mean, clearly our one of our fundamental interests are being involved in the construction of whatever facilities are done. And so we'd urge a larger dollar amount as possible, but we know that that's not possible. And I want to say that there's a lot of discussion now in the labor community about any more GO bonds. And there are many of my brothers and sisters who are opposed to any GO bond whatsoever for any project. Any time in the next several years would be my guess, because we're not going to be out of our current budgetary situation for some time. So that's going to add a new ripple to whatever happens out of this process. For us, it's very clear that there must be a GO bond component to this financing. There's obviously an opportunity to do revenue financing, a revenue bond out of a piece of this, because there will be water that's delivered. There's an ability to make an assessment, so there should be user pays for part of this. But I think, as Joe mentioned before, there is a huge legacy issue, and the mitigation that should be done, shouldn't just be through mitigation fees, but there's going to be, the damage that's been done from decades of use by farmers, in the Delta, besides the water users down south. Farmers have caused damage. Sacramento County, residents that live here have caused damage through sewage, and we're doing it every day. Everything we pump into the Delta is damaging the Delta, so it's not just the water users down south or whatever construction project happens that's going to cause damage. So there must be a GO, part to the revenue. I think there needs to be a long-term process. I think the legislation that's been proposed is going in the right direction, and there's a model that exists now. The High-Speed Rail Authority was created, and it's going to be a long-term process for us to be able to build high-speed rail. It's going to be 20 or 30 years before we're able to build out a system. It's going to go past the length of any one of the members that are here today. It's going to go past my timeline and other folks, and you need to set up an authority or some sort of process so that you can take a long-term perspective. Otherwise, we just keep spinning the wheel on this, and there really is a water crisis. I've worked with Senator Cogdill and other folks, and talked about this issue a lot with a lot of people. And the people in the Central Valley, it's a heartbreaking situation. And it's easy for us. For me, I live here in Sacramento. We've got all the water I need. I don't even have a water meter. But there are a lot of
working
folks,
on that.
a lot of folks all around the state. There's people that don't have to deal with the situation.
Don't
I
tell
shouldn't say
people
that, or
from LA
I shouldn't say that, or
that don't
Delta.
have water meters.
I lived in Los Angeles too, where you have a right to wash your car, every other day. And there's a lot of people that don't have the same kind of constructs about water. But there are some people they're going out of business. And there's members of mine that are in the Central Valley. We've got a 25 or 30% unemployment situation right now in the construction trades. The Central Valley is just getting slammed. And I think it's easy for us to spin our wheels and to ask for more reports and set up these things that are totally unrealistic just to run out the clock, because there's plenty of people who don't want to see anything happen. And anytime you provide an extra drop of water, an extra ounce of a kilowatt, anything that's growth-inducing, there are folks who are just totally opposed to that. And that's been an eye-opener for me, because there are people that are suffering, and there is a water crisis, and we need to do something in an expedited manner, and there needs to be a long-term process that's done to do this, and something like a high-speed rail authority or some kind of process where there's going to be decision-making that can extend past our lifetime is really important, and setting up the financing. And we'll be there to support it, politically and legislatively. It's something that's critical for us and critical for the state. So
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. So let's go to questions of the members. Senator Cogdill.
Thank you. Not so much maybe a question as a statement relating to the whole issue of financing, at least as it plays into the infrastructure bonds that we've been talking about now for years. I think most of you know the structure there, and we talk a lot about nexus and about public benefit and all those things, and I think that's only right to try to determine if there are benefits that can legitimately be determined as public. Then we need to find some broad way to finance that, whether it's through GO bonds or what have you. But I think the important thing to point out, which I think gets lost sometimes in this discussion, is that in the proposals that we've made in the past relating to how to pay for this infrastructure, and remember we're talking about with the surface water storage pieces of the component probably close to $40 billion in infrastructure, that the majority of that money, the beneficiaries, if you will, have to step forward, have to sign on the dotted line, being willing to issue the revenue bonds to pay for the majority of the construction before they can access the $3 billion of what we've called public benefit money out there. So I think that's something that really needs to be remembered in all of this discussion, that we're talking about, if it's a bond of $10 billion, about leveraging another $30 billion worth of infrastructure to be paid for, again, by the beneficiaries.
Can I just,
Yeah.
because I'm not always down in your neck of the woods.
Right.
By beneficiaries from your area,
Right.
for example, agricultural communities and the ratepayers in the cities?
I think
Who are the
anybody that, again,
beneficiaries?
would contract for a portion of the water that would be provided by the facility.
So Fresno Water District and
Yeah,
and the
or,
agricultural.
I think we envision joint ventures, or, whatever. But again, the important point being that we're not going to spend a dime of that money until the majority of it is committed by beneficiaries, which is something that has always been a concern for many. And I think that gets lost in the discussion, especially now when we're trying to equate the problem to the ongoing general fund budget problem that we have in this state. And I think it's important, too, to note that, with a problem almost as big as the one we have now, the voters stepped up and approved $9 billion worth of high-speed rail bonds. And I think water has to certainly come in a higher priority for most people than high-speed rail. So, again, I don't know that is going to ultimately be the problem that we may think it is. I think the people of the state understand how important water is to our future, and we'll take that into consideration. We also know that the debt that's there now will be retired over time. We're not talking about, as Senator Wolk points out, doing this tomorrow. This is going to take years to get it done. So, again, I just don't think we should get too awful hung up about the current general plan problems with our budget and what it means to moving forward with at least putting the question before the voters on how they want to program possible future spending relating to water infrastructure. But again, I just wanted to point that out, that we've always talked about a pretty massive leveraging of about 4 to 1 on the improvements that we're talking about here.
Thank you, Senator. And I just want to remind us as we wrap up this issue, we're talking about the finance provisions in Senator Sabinian's SB 12. These are fees, basically, relating to the council and its planning and implementation functions, although we have kind of reference by a couple of witnesses been made to a broader need for a GO bond potentially to pick up other parts of what we need to do. So to the extent we can, I'd like to stay focused on the bill and its finance provisions so we can wrap that up.
Can I ask a quick question about that?
Yeah, certainly.
Particularly? As it concerns the discussion about going up into the watershed, if you will, and the impacts that have now gone on for decades and centuries and all of this. I mean, are you actually talking about going all the way back and trying to assess the impacts of things like Hetch Hetchy and what that has done to the Delta over time? And are we going to put fees on water users in the city of San Francisco in order to deal with part of this problem in the Delta? What about the diversions in the McCollum River over time? I mean, this goes, at what point do we say we can't get back to, that pristine situation that existed before the 1850s and call it, at a point we're going to move forward from and try to get to that? And I guess that's the confusion that I continue to have in all this when we talk about restoration and enhancement and all those things. What is the goal we're trying to achieve, and how in the world do we expect to do it?
I guess I would respond this way, Senator. The Sabinian bill contains a provision for fees to be imposed for the upstream users, and that would include, potentially, upstream users of the Delta go up into Hetch Hetchy system, so that would be the San Francisco, McCollum. It would be all the tributaries on the Bay Delta system. You could impose a fee. As I was discussing before, that's primarily a mitigation fee. Now, you don't set that fee on a level to be punitive or to make up for all their damage. You would set it based on a spending plan that's designed around a specific restoration goal. In this case, in the plan, it's set around the concept of trying to pay for the costs of restoration of the Delta. And so it would be driven by whatever permit-based plans for restoration today to achieve those goals, not to try to bring it back to a pre-1850
Okay, but arguably that could be a very moving target, right?
It is the target, though, that's set in this whole concept, is to try to restore the delta as part of to restore the delta ecosystem in order to achieve the co-equal goals.
Yeah, specifically, we've talked about this. I think we might all benefit from actually reading what the bill says about what is this restoration thing. And it is defined as the application of ecological principles to restore a degraded or fragmented ecosystem and return it to a condition in which its biological and structural components achieve a close approximation of its natural potential.
Sure.
That is currently the definition that we're working on. All right?
That's a lot.
And I do want everyone to know that before, speaking of spreading the fees, throughout the watershed and folks that are all part of the system, before Senator Leno left, I reminded him that the city of San Francisco diverts more from the Delta watershed than the city of Los Angeles.
And I said,
And Lois Wolt has shown great restraint in this whole
Yes,
discussion.
she has.
and they have about 1/3 of the population.
Didn't say a word.
Yes, Mr. Costello.
Jared.
I'd like to emphasize a point on the approach. There is a certain amount of money, presumably, that our economy can sustain. We don't necessarily have to have it on day one, and we can define what that might be with the focus on the delta restoration. If we knew what that money was, and we can spread this fee as broad as legally and reasonably possible, that will define the amount of restoration that we can do. Now, admittedly, that's how businesses operate, but that's what we're advocating, and we stretch ourselves to do as much as we possibly can with the money that's available.
All right. Yes, Senator
Question
Pavlik.
from Mr. Caves. Mr. Caves, the source of money on the fees, I get ecosystem restoration and revenue bonds, but ongoing expenses for the council, the conservancy, the science board, the water master, water rights hearings, Delta Protection Commission.
Yeah, I think arguably that these aren't referenced directly particularly in the BDCP section in the section with regard to the contractors, and I think you want to make sure that there is an appropriate contribution made there. Certainly, whatever other fees are imposed on
That
other users.
one time or ongoing? Ongoing.
I mean, these would be fees to operate these and to pay for their ongoing operation cost.
So as a ratepayer in Met, that would be.
Again, I think the fee system that you have in the bill itself, in the Smithian bill itself, we would argue, one, your definition of who can pay for public benefits is probably too narrow. I think you need to flesh out the terms of the fee. You need to think about what sort of parameters you want to put on it and defining much more specifically what you want it to pay for. The scope of the fees now are fairly general and are left up to the council. I think as a practical matter, this legislature probably wants to decide what sort of fees you're going to impose, what the amounts are likely to be, and what they need to pay for, much more directly.
How are most conservancies funded, though?
Most conservancies are not funded by fees. They are funded by the ELPF, the Environmental License Plate Fund,
Not
which
general
is
fund. It's,
and
there's no
bond
general
funds.
fund.
Now, I think you have a different situation here because you really do have a contemplation in Senator Woke's bill is that the Delta Conservancy will have a very large role in implementing an ecosystem restoration program that is connected to any conveyance that would occur or any other ecosystem restoration that the state might choose to fund. And so that goes beyond the normal role of a conservancy. So this will be a much larger and I think very different conservancy than most.
And is it a correct assumption to make if the exporters are interested in a reliable water supply, such as a dual conveyance or conveyance system or anything, if that didn't move forward through the BDC process, the other moving parts, since the fees are all generated from the outside beneficiaries in Southern California and maybe the ag, the rest sort of falls apart as well. I mean, isn't it all sort of linked together, or is that not a fair statement?
I would say, in the way this is structured now, it is not necessarily linked together. This package could go forward if BDCP doesn't move. You still have a mechanism in place to move forward with Delta restoration and with Delta management. And I think that however you however we structure that, that's a good idea. I think what's been lacking is having those institutions in place and having mechanisms that can deal with it. The challenge right now, as we talked about in the previous panel, is how do you integrate a BDCP that's already some ways down the road?
Moving down, that's the biggest challenge I have, frankly, is how do you fit those together.
Senator Wolk.
I want to piggyback on what my colleagues have said. The fee, as it's listed in SB1, does not include the Conservancy or DPC or any of these other things, and it really needs to. It only mentions the plan and establishing the council. So that has to be broader, and will be. So I wanted to raise one other issue. And this was raised by Dean Mazinski in his PPIC report, which we'll talk about tomorrow. In the 1970s, when the Clean Water Act was imposed, or was voted on and supported, there were great changes to local governments in terms of their requirements for water quality. And the federal government made available a tremendous amount of funding, grants to local communities, 75% versus 25%, which the locals put forward, in order to assist them to build sewage treatment, wastewater treatment plants throughout the nation. The economy is terrible, but I think with respect to the Delta and with respect to wastewater treatment, we know the issue with Sacramento, but it's not just Sacramento that has an issue with its wastewater treatment facility and having to upgrade that at tremendous cost, 100% to the local community. That's true for many communities throughout the Delta that dump into the Delta. So it seems to me, as we're looking at funding, one source of this might be grant funding from the federal government to deal with this issue of wastewater treatment, as well as if we're interested in approaching the ag runoff issue. It's going to be costly, and we need to assist the farmers to be able to do this. It's to the good of everyone, but it's expensive. So that's one area we ought to take another look at.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quick comments. I just wanted to ask Mr. Hansen, I thought I heard two conflicting statements from you about the labor community's position on GO bonds. Did you say that the current dialogue is that no one really wants to support that, but that you do as an individual, or could you reconcile that for me?
In this situation, there's going to be two different parts of the labor community. So one labor community,
Education,
two parts.
Oh, understood. Never mind. Enough said. Enough said on
Folks that
that.
are dependent
Right.
on the general fund.
Understood. Thank you. And then more of a general question for the panel as a whole. Sometimes I think of the whole financing issue, not only for the Delta, but for many things that we take for granted in the state of California, that if there was a baseline for, say, a statewide benefit assessment for water and flood control, do you think there's any appetite for that kind of a financing mechanism? And the reason I say that is that I think part of our barrier, and having just come back from Orange County at that special water hearing, is that, we have such an immense state with so many people, with so much diversity of thought and perspective, that simply educating all Californians about what the Delta is and what the critical, essentially, spigot we are for the rest of California, but that if we were able to, quote-unquote, market it in the sense that, this is a very, very critical estuary for so many reasons, for the economy, for the ecology of the state. Do you think there is an appetite for any kind of a statewide baseline benefit assessment? I don't know.
Public goods charge on water.
Something like the PUC does. I mean, we funded
Yeah.
the solar initiative.
It's
that
a public goods charge on water.
So that's what it would be.
absolutely
But,
sounds
well,
like
I guess
a
I also
common
had a
sense
thought
approach.
that, we will solve the water problems in the legislature when we start running out of water for coffee. So maybe we should start, thinking about water in those terms. But
All right.
thank
Well,
you.
on that note, we are going to move right to the. Well, I want to thank the witnesses very much. That was great testimony. We appreciate it. We'll go right to public comment, and this is on any of the aspects of the Submittian Bill, SB 12, preprint Senate Bill 1 that we've just been discussing. Come on up. We are going to limit public comment. There's a microphone there, where Dante John Nomalini is standing. So we'll take you first on. We're going to limit this to 1 minute because we are out of time.
All right,
So,
Dante John Nomalini with Central Delta Water Agency. First of all, on council structure and authority, as submitted in our written comments, we view a much more limited role for the council. We see the BDCP as biased and oriented towards an isolated facility, and that a council review with limited authority would be the opportunity to get the Delta counties and communities into the process so they in fact can have a role, and if they do have a significant role, we think we could end up with a solution that could be supported statewide and not only throughout the rest of the state but in the Delta. The Water Master Authority as structured in the Smithian bill is, in our view, unworkable. We have suggested that there be an inspector general type of position that would police the water project operations. What we have today is a conflict of interest with the State Water Resources Control Board being unable to really regulate the projects because of the constant interference by the governor of the state and the interrelationship of the Department of Water Resources in the appointees of the members as well as the integration of staff. So we think if we leave the state board in position, change the review process so that on those issues where there's this clear conflict, there will be independent review of both factual and legal issues at the appellate level, that the state board remains intact, and then we have an inspector general position that will police or help police the state water project operation as well as the federal project operation because they are coordinated. The water conveyance decision, of course, the fatal flaw for us is an isolated facility, which in our view means the demise of the Delta. So there is no solution that has that. The investment of funds we would think would better be spent on self-sufficiency that would loosen up water supplies to help agriculture, and ultimately we have to develop more water in the state, take control of growth not only in the Delta but throughout the state. And Delta Finance, the fee mechanism that we see is insane. We don't think it'll
not
work.
Ludicrous.
It's not appropriate. We certainly will not be paying a fee voluntarily or going along with one that is oriented to our destruction. Thank you.
Thank you. Are the folks that are lined up now the only ones interested in public comment? Is anyone else intending to speak, just so I can get a handle on this? All right, so I'm going to ask folks to try to keep it to a minute. We may have a little more time than that if we don't have a lot of additional witnesses, but let's try to move as quickly as we can. Thanks.
Committee members, thank you for allowing me to speak for my minute. I'm Steve Cassover. I've passed a document out to you. I've spent a decade and a half as a senior economist at the California Department of Water Resources. Formerly, I was the planning officer for the United States Bureau of Reclamation in charge of planning in Southern California. Most recently, I am a research faculty member at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and today I am an independent consultant, and I prepared this document just out of interest. Nobody has paid me, and I'm glad to say that what I wanted to find out was, is this project ready to happen? Have we considered all the issues that a project in the 21st century in California would need to concern itself with in order to be built, financed, approved, and built? And what I found was basically just to aggregate information that is presently available from various reports, which I've footnoted copiously, as you can see in the document. As an academic, I can't help myself. My overall observation is that the costs are nebulous. In many cases, they don't exist. We have very poor definition of them. But if we're looking at general costs for a 15,000 CFS canal, which is the focus of BDCP, we're looking at least $23 billion to $53.8 billion. The high end is the tunnel. The low end is the east alignment with through Delta. Both of them have through Delta, by the way. Included in that, I have off-stream storage reservoirs, Sites Reservoir, and Temperance Flat. Ecosystem restoration, we're looking at 2 to 6 billion. I picked 4 billion for my table. It's the middle of the road. That's how I felt. If we look at a bond at this level, we're looking at about $1.5 billion to $3.5 billion for debt service annually. And it really doesn't matter. I want to make one point about revenue bonds, and then I'm going to sit down. Revenue bond underwriters are extremely conservative economists, far more conservative than I am. They're going to ask the water utilities upon which they're going to bond this project, what other stipulations are there in this project prior to your being able to generate revenues from it? And if one of the stipulations is, well, we've got to mitigate. We've got this $6.5 billion GO bond that the California legislature is going to float, the public's going to vote on, and so after that, we're going to get our revenues. I would like to suggest that's not going to satisfy the bond underwriters. And we must be cognizant that these are the folks that are going to allow agencies like the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California to acquire revenue bonds.
Thank you, Mr. Kessler.
Thank you.
Mike Jackson, I didn't realize the finance thing was going to come up, so I didn't leave. The present fee system is unfair, it's unequitable, and it's unworkable. The reason being that you have isolated the benefits in this program to the Delta alone. You are now talking about making the everyone else in the state who doesn't receive water from this project responsible for paying for it. That simply is not fair to large portions of rural California that don't have anything to do with the problems in the Delta and don't have anything to do with the operation of the state and federal projects. I live in the state watershed in Quincy, California. The only effect that the state water project, there's no benefit to the state water project as far as we can tell. The only real effect of it is that you destroyed our salmon streams. We used to have guide services and huge numbers of little cottages for people to come up and recreate, and there's no anadromous fish anymore. So the idea that we would be paying for the Met to build the conveyance seems to be unfair. I talked to some friends in Tuolumne County, and since they haven't been able to get their area of origin water that was promised to them when New Melones was built, they don't understand why they ought to be paying for New Melones not delivering water to them, but to pay for the Delta. In terms of the ecosystem restoration program, most of the money in the last bonds was wasted. There were some good ideas, but it turns out that shallow water habitat is not what the species needed. And the Nature Conservancy owns a lot of land, but in fact, the whole real estate division of the environmental movement owns a lot of land, but it didn't improve anything. And so be very, very careful that you don't create sort of a gilded area of an environment while you make everybody else...
I need you to wrap up, Mr. Jackson.
While you make everybody else pay for it, while their environments are despoiled by the solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Mannion, Regional Council of Rural Counties. I will be very brief. You have my written comments. In regards to the Delta Stewardship Council, I believe that Mr. Quinn adequately addressed our issues. Again, it's the scope of the council's responsibilities and powers. We do believe that they should definitely be pulled back and that the scope should focus on the statutory Delta. In regards to the Delta Water Master, We agree with many of the comments you've heard to date. Again, the concern was the proposed scope going up into the watershed of authority. We really do believe that the Water Board is the appropriate place to handle all of those decisions. They do have the process and they do provide the due process, but the idea of perhaps some type of Delta water master that was limited to the statutory Delta that kind of was there under the direction of the Water Board to kind of assist their efforts, that is, worth exploring. On the Delta finance, I think that Mr. Caves laid out what the bill does in its current form very well. When you come to the fees on the upper watershed, that is not the beneficiary pays. The beneficiary pays is only dealing with the export. So that will be a big concern with a lot of our constituents. And we would also say that before you really get into a discussion of fees and who's going to pay, you really need to get to the issue of policy. So I would say a lot of our concerns resolve around the geographic scope of the plan, the council's responsibilities, authorities, and so forth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Mike Dillon, representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, which includes some of the sewer agencies that Senator Wolk just referred to. I'll be brief. We have submitted a letter. We agree with the intent to ensure that there's better coordination among the agencies responsible for the Delta. Our members want to make sure, though, that the Delta Stewardship Council would not have authority to override the regional boards, the state board, the Porter-Cologne Act, and so forth. The state and regional boards, as you know, Mr. Chairman and members, have real expertise in NPDES permits, basin plans, other water quality issues. And so while our members don't always agree with their regulatory decisions, it's at least a process we know and the people have a certain expertise. We don't think it was your intent to provide any overriding authority, but we would just respectfully ask for a clarification. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair and members who have graciously stuck it out with the public here today. My name is Craig Johns. I'm here on behalf of Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District, one of the agencies that Senator Wolk referred to a moment ago, serving about 1,300,000 people who live and work in the Sacramento region. We submitted a letter on the bill a week ago. Hopefully you've had a chance to see it. I just want to underscore 2 points. There is language in the bill that talks about mitigation that would need to be paid for by the water exporters. Our view is it does not go far enough because it does not get into the need for the exporters to mitigate for the impacts on local agencies, on public infrastructure and so forth that will be either needed and or current facilities that would be affected by the construction and operation of the canal. The second point, and we submitted specific suggested language to hopefully tidy that up. The second point Mr. Dillon touched on briefly, and I saw some nodding of heads saying that there was not an intent to try to provide super authority to the Delta Council over permitting and planning of the regional and state water boards perform, and we support those comments and also submitted similar language. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara Berrigan-Perea again with Restore the Delta. We have submitted comments in writing, so we just have 2 items we want to touch on. First, regard to the creation of the council. Senator Wolk explained last week, and we've gone back and done research, we can't find one example of a local and state or local and or state and federal management area in which local representation is so underrepresented as is proposed in this legislation, period. I can't find one in the West, let alone California. So with that said, we really want to stress that good governance for the Delta, whether it's a council or not, or through a conservancy, whatever is proposed has to have equal representation between the Delta and state interests. That's what's democratic. That is what's fair. And for people to give testimony and say you have to bring people in with a certain level of expertise from the outside, that discounts the numbers of people we have within the Delta who have expertise on water management issues within the Delta. In terms of conveyance and funding for conveyance, and what would happen with the bond structure, we think there's a real important question that everyone needs to walk away with asking. If money is going to be needed for mitigation to reduce environmental damage caused by water exports, as written into the bill, for natural resources in the Delta and its tributaries, the question we think that needs to be asked is, how does money mitigate transforming the Sacramento River into a losing stream? We can spend and we can spend and we can spend, but it's not, the money is not going to fix it or transform it if the water isn't there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I'll be brief. Kathy Christian, representing the 5 Delta counties. Perfect segue for what I was about to say, and that is if there's going to be a structure with the power that the Delta Stewardship Council is going to have, then we also believe that there needs to be far more representation from the Delta itself on that board. And we agree that throughout this nation, much less this state, those kinds of authorities have equal representation or strong representation from the local communities that are being affected by the decisions that the council is going to make. It doesn't make any sense to have just one person from the Delta Protection Commission on that. We would ask you to take a look at other governance structures. There's a possibility of an equal number from the state and local government, and those people could choose additional members. That was suggested by one of the commentators at the last hearing. We think there needs to be far more time spent looking at the kind of governance structure that would work, that would last, and that could actually implement the kind of policies that you hope to come up with. So we urge you to take another look at that issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John Herrick, South Delta Water Agency again. I do want to say that we actually appreciate the efforts, but I think the problem we're facing is highlighted by the chairman's reading of that section which tries to define restoration. You know, to be kind, that needs to be redrafted a little bit. I have no idea what that means. But the magnitude of these issues and the underlying facts and the proposed problems argues against something be done really fast. Now, that's not an effort to delay things, but it's a clarification as to we're rushing to a judgment that won't work. With regard to the fees, I won't go into the Delta's example, but you know, we've had farmers diverting for 140 years, or almost 140 years, and to ascribe a fee to them for the mitigation of the destruction of the fisheries is, to use the chairman's word, ludicrous. But the more easy example of not you, Chairman. The better example of that is simply go upstream. Find a rancher on a tributary that started diverting in 1910, 1920. There's no rational argument that he's a contributor to the destruction of the fisheries in the Delta, and yet he would be ascribed a fee here. It's pretty scary to hear someone say, well, we can calculate what the economy can sustain when we develop the fees in trying to fund these programs. Real quickly, the conveyance issue, I'd like to just join in what Jonas Minton said. There are all sorts of problems with that. The issue of the council, I just want to propose to you an example which makes this almost unworkable at this point. If the council has to make a plan for these co-equal goals, what if the council decides, as we think exists now, in the first 2 years of a drought, there's very little surplus water and only a little bit of storage for exports, but in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th years of the drought, there's no underregulated supply, and the only water in the dams are for fishery needs. Now, if that's the calculation, what is the balancing that the council will do to protect fisheries and have a reliable supply for someone? And lastly, I'd like to leave you with the issue of the cost, the overall cost. We've heard that the exporters want to pay for the cost of the canal itself and some related matters. That representation, that assurance was based on an estimation of between $4 and $5 billion. That's what was said to all the contractors up and down the state. If the costs are now $20 billion and above, somebody's zooming us, right? Because nobody goes through a calculation and says, well, I can barely pay my share of $4 billion. Now I'm going to pay my share of $25 billion? Something's not right here. And so we need to contemplate this. If the costs are prohibitive for the users, then what are we doing?
And I think there's something going on here that's unspoken and unexamined. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Barbara Daly, and I'm a resident of Clarksburg, and I'm a landowner out there. I did fax you all a letter of my comments last Tuesday, and thank you for reading them. The things I have to say are a little bit different than what you've already heard. I've been trying to think of other strategies, other ways. As Senator Wolk said, maybe a plan B. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you were speaking of, Senator Wolk, but Chairman Huffman, what you were saying about additional strategies, I guess I would just say that these are other strategies that I would hope would be thought about. Things, and I would hope these would be worthy approaches to the water issues, because I think we can't make any more water, which many people have said. We just have to manage better the water we already have. So things that I already brought up, like the drip and alternative irrigation systems, meters throughout California, looking at the ammonia and the pharmaceuticals in our water system and cleaning that up, maybe looking at growing bison instead of cows in California, restrict what we can do with the subsidized water and not resell it, perennial crops not grown with imported water, maybe desalinate gray water, and or use products on crops that improve their growth process and use less water. I know those things are out there. So I would just hope that we might look at other strategies to improve the water we have and let everyone have some water. And I would just ask that we stop contracting out our water and privatizing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gail Dillahant with Western Growers Association, and we are concerned about the co-equal goals. We do support the Delta Vision's definition, but after today's hearing, I'm not quite sure what that is. So that clarification would be really nice. We definitely need enough water to grow healthful food. We're also concerned about the BDC process being part of the plan, and additionally would like that process to be open. So I did submit a letter of further comments, and I appreciate you taking a look at them.
Thank you. We will.
Melinda Terry, North Delta Water Agency. I'll repeat what I said this morning. Even under the HCP portion of BDCP, there's 100,000 acres identified in the Delta to be converted from prime farmland to restoration projects. And that does not include the amount of mitigation of additional land that needs to be converted in the Delta to mitigate for the building of a canal, which currently being analyzed as an unlined, so it's another 10,000 acres. I mean, when you mitigate, it's 5 to 1, 10 to 1, so what? We have another 50,000, 100,000 acres. Under this fee, why aren't these folks being compensated for what they're giving up and then being asked to pay a fee on top of what these communities are already going to have to give up? The canal is being, built to mitigate for the killing of the fish at the pumps to be able to convey water, and yet we're going to pay for the habitat so that we can build the canal. It doesn't make sense. It's not equitable, and there's no swimming pools are going to be emptied in San Diego. There's, as soon as this fix is done, our farmers in the Central Valley will be able to continue to go on. No golf course is going to be ripped out, but these folks are going to lose their livelihoods forever. And then they're going to be asked to pay a fee on top of that. On the Delta Council, I find it also odd that they're going to meet once a month and only twice is going to be in the Delta. Okay, after everything I just told you, really? It doesn't make sense, the equity and or the lack thereof in this package and what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Glazard from Organic Sacramento. And again, I just want to quickly reinforce and echo a lot of what's been said earlier. We have serious concerns about the governance. It's way, way too risky to put governance of 2/3 of California's water in the hands of 7 people or 10 or 15. It just, it's a lot. And also is large amounts of land that are going to be going along with the water. It would be good to reinforce laws that are already in place. I believe that a lot of the laws even as much as water rights laws are not being currently enforced. And I think that that's where a lot of the energy needs to go, to being sure that our current laws that are there for protection of our water and for proper allocation are revisited, or if not revisited, enforced and taken seriously. Regarding a water master, way too much power and authority will be given to a single individual in that case. Regarding the peripheral canal possibility, any option that takes water above the delta is going to further destroy the delta. Whether it's more water than they're taking currently from below the delta or not, it doesn't matter. If you're taking it above the delta, it's not going through, it's not flushing out, it's not allowing the delta to be a freshwater estuary, and it's going to further destroy it. Regarding funding, I would like to see available funds to reinforce and revitalize current infrastructure. Why pay $40 billion for a peripheral canal that's more for private interest than the public, when you can work with what we currently have and
We need
make
to wrap
that,
it up, ma'am.
Okay, and make that the monies, less money will be spent for better outcome.
Thank
in
you.
that. Thank you.
Mr. Jennings, final word, but don't take that to mean you have a longer time allocation.
I trust you got my comments, and you all get a gold star for perseverance here today, and certainly the events today give me a greater appreciation of William Burroughs' observation that a paranoid schizophrenic is simply someone who's discovered what's going on. Thank you.
What a way to end a hearing.
We do have mental health.
How do you
money.
top that? We are going to adjourn. We will hopefully see many of you back Thursday to continue this discussion.